Okay, so again, this is Zoom for beginners, and I'm Allison Rogers, Instructional Tech at Reset, and today we're going to cover just the basics of Zoom, account setup, kind of the etiquette and best practices for hosting meetings virtual. I'm going to show you just some of the basic navigational features such as updating your profile, some of the crucial settings you might want to be aware of, and then how to attend and schedule a meeting. So first and foremost, I want to reference CC Reset Tech Department's Zoom guidance slide deck. It is linked in this presentation right here. So if I were to go to that link, this is what that looks like. And so that Tech Department has created kind of a how-to guide on some of those basic navigational features in addition to account setup. And so I want to reference that piece because if you have any questions about account setup, I would refer to the tech department specifically for those things, but they refer you to signing in with your Google CC Reset account, right? And you want to join under CC Reset sort of umbrella account within Zoom that allows you to have meetings that are beyond the 40-minute minimum or maximum for free accounts, because we work within education, so that's a nice feature. So ensure that when you've created your account, you are in fact using your ccreset.org email address and you're working within that CC Reset account umbrella. And again, they've just got a couple step-by-step navigational pieces, so if you want to reference this, feel free to find that linked in your agenda or the slide deck. Okay, so now I'm going to move back to my presentation here. Okay, so a couple tips on how to actually access Zoom. So you can go to zoom.us/sign-in and just simply go to that URL every time, or you could even bookmark that within your Chrome browser. I also want to show you a Chrome extension called Zoom Scheduler and a shortcut within Gmail that just gives you a little bit easier access to going into Zoom. So instead of having to, open up a new browser and actually type it in, you could enable this Zoom Scheduler extension that looks like this. And if I were to click that, once I have added this extension to my Chrome and logged in, it allows me to do a quick schedule a meeting from here. But I also can just go directly to Zoom by clicking my account here, and it pops me right into my Zoom account. So again, that's just a nice quick extension. Another feature could be if you were in your Gmail, for example, and you want to quickly access Zoom, you could go to the far right-hand side, and this is newly enabled, I believe, for CC Reset. You can see you have shortcuts to things like calendar, etc. But if you look here, it says Zoom for G Suite, and if I click that, it lets me kind of have this quick shortcut to Zoom. So I can start a quick meeting here. It lets me access my meetings that I have already scheduled. I could also click the three dots here and just say visit Zoom, and it again will take me directly to the Zoom login. So you'll notice that Zoom is playing nice with Google, that it's integrating nicely. So I would recommend utilizing some of those shortcuts instead of having to always log in in a new window. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about some telecommunication etiquette first before we get into the nuts and bolts of Zoom. I think that the important part of going over this is I don't think necessarily so much to teach you all these ins and outs, but perhaps when you're setting up your own meetings to have the best success with students and parents or whoever the stakeholders are you're working with. So my best advice in all of the remote meetings I've attended and led is to try and make that virtual experience feel like a real in-person meeting as much as possible. I know it's never going to be the same as sitting around, conference room table or being in the office, but considering those things that make an in-person meeting feel in person, such as, small talk, right? So the beginning of a meeting, actually talking about things outside of work, introducing yourself, giving context to why you're there. Some of those things that we might forget when we're in the virtual world, like humor, and, in the teaching environment, allowing for wait time, actually sitting there awkwardly and when you ask a question and giving everybody an opportunity to think of an answer, right? Giving breaks, this is huge. We talk about, brain breaks and allowing for, you know, us to kind of recover in a meeting, get a drink, go to the bathroom, those things, but those are all relevant to online too, especially kind of giving a break for your eyes. Humanize the experience, be transparent, talking about, what you're expecting to see during the meeting, and then also allowing for mistakes to be learning opportunities. So especially since this whole experience is new for everybody, students, adults alike, and instead of being critical, let's, talk about how modeling that behavior, but also showcasing mistakes might be an opportunity to say, okay, this is actually how we're going to do this from here on out. And then lastly, just some additional considerations. Just like you would in any other meeting, you want to talk about, what's your purpose? Do you have an agenda? If it's going to be an hour, make sure you stick to that hour. And then I think it's really important to have your video on for crucial conversations. So what I mean by that is if you needed to have those things like eye contact and just those gestures of agreement or confusion or whatever it might be in a in-person real meeting, you would want to be able to enable that in a virtual. So sharing your video when you need to really see people's reactions and they need to see yours, just having those considerations, but then also, knowing when it's appropriate to share your screen. Maybe everyone needs that visual to help discuss, but then unshare your screen and show your face so you can have that, human interaction piece. So anyway, just a couple of things to consider before you, start hosting meetings and that sort of thing. I think these are just some good reminders. I also wanted to reference this write-up from Lenawee County. They created this little, best practices in virtual meetings, and it's linked here if you want to reference this or borrow it. But it just kind of talks about, what your virtual office space should look like. So this might be helpful to discuss with kids, right? So what should their space look like when they're, doing school, or what types of distractions might they want to be prepared for, or, just being aware of like how you look in the camera or what can be seen in the background. All those just little distractions. I think we've all experienced distractions that happen, right? But just kind of trying to be aware of what that might look like. And then, make sure that you have the appropriate time set aside to, do whatever activity you're doing, making sure that all of your connectivities are set up appropriately, volume, do you need a headset, can people hear you, can people see you, all those things. Which reminds me, I heard that Zoom's having some issues today, so it'll be pretty ironic if we have some Zoom downfalls during the Zoom for Beginners session, but if that happens, we'll work through it. And then setting up expectations, a lot of things that we just discussed, knowing, what's appropriate in this sort of new virtual world we're navigating. Talking about sharing your screen, I discussed that earlier, when it's, you should be seeing a person's face-to-face versus when you need that visual. And then monitoring the chat box. I talked about referencing the chat box for materials today that you need to reference, but this might be something that the etiquette of chat use that you work with students, right? What is appropriate use of the chat box, maybe what is not appropriate use. Okay, so let's get into some of the nuts and bolts of Zoom. So once you actually log in and you're in your CC Reset account, you may have noticed that in some meetings, folks have a picture up when maybe they're not sharing their video. So if that is something that you are interested in, you simply just need to go to under the Profile tab and change your picture that way. So I'm going to jump into the actual live Zoom. Okay, so if I click under profile, you can see I have my picture here, but if I wanted to change it, I just simply click change. If I delete it, I click delete, and you can upload it from your computer or whatever image that you want. And if I scroll down, you'll notice kind of just basic navigations here. On the left-hand side, it's kind of like a little table of contents of the things you might want to address within Zoom. And then up at the right-hand side are kind of shortcuts, schedule a meeting, join a meeting, host a meeting. So I'm going to go through some of these things on the left-hand side today. So besides changing your picture or adding a picture if you don't already have one, some of the only other main items that you might want to change that, because usually the default are good to go here, but if you scroll onto the very bottom, I have added my calendar and contact integration. That's totally up to you, but I like that I can have that Zoom piece fully integrated into my Google Calendar, so I can even, and I'll show you this a little bit later, but I can even click directly from my Google Calendar link and join or start a meeting that way. So that's kind of the basics for your profile. Next, let's talk about settings. Okay, so if I go down to the settings tab, and feel free to follow along with me in your account or just watch through what I'm discussing here. So within settings, under meeting, there's even a more specific table of contents. So as I scroll down, you'll notice that this table of contents will light up. So I'm just going to speak to the basic settings in this session today, because you can get into some of the more advanced sessions, but I think that might be good for maybe a part 2 that we'll likely want to have a session on in a couple weeks. So I'm going to scroll down and just kind of highlight some of the main settings to be concerned with. Now, I'm not giving you necessarily recommendations of what you should or shouldn't enable, but more so like, hey, did you know that this feature was available? You might want to consider how this might meet your needs for the purposes of your Zoom meetings. So for example, host video, start meetings with host video on. You can enable that as a default. So what you're setting here is when I create a meeting or I attend a meeting, these will be my sort of default settings. Now, you can always go back and change these, but if you, let's say you scheduled a meeting and then change your settings, just keep in mind that that originally scheduled meeting might not reflect all of those changes. So just something to consider. Participant videos, maybe you want to have that enabled to off when they pop in. I kind of like having people come in and be able to see their faces. Audio type, I would recommend telephone and computer audio, so you have both options. Join before host, that's a personal preference. I think some of these settings you'll want to consider, okay, am I working with students? Or am I working with maybe more of this is like what we're doing, like a training session or a meeting with colleagues. So whatever your purpose is, kind of think through some of these settings. Let's see, I'm just going to scroll through here. So require a password when scheduling new meetings. So that is something that CC would recommend overall. And I would say especially when you're working with students, I think that's when it's more crucial. So just, something to consider there, that this would, when you're creating a meeting, default you to require a password, right? You can always change that, but if you set that as a default, that's what that means. Okay, moving down further, you can mute participants on entry. You can give yourself reminders. Okay, so let's talk about the chat features. You can allow participants to utilize the chat box. I think that's great. I think that's an important tool to use whether you're working with students or adults. However, you might want to maybe discuss the etiquette of the chat box before enabling that for students, right? And then maybe consider like what the private chat feature would be for when you're working with students, right? That's not just I'm going to say something to the whole group, but that would be I'm going to privately message an individual attendee. Auto-saving chats, I have that enabled, because sometimes I'll host a meeting and it's something that I like to reference later, or oh, what was that question? I want to make sure I follow up with that person. And if I accidentally end the meeting, I can't go back and get that chat. But if I auto save it, it will automatically save the chat box to my computer, so that way whether I remember to do it or not, it's being done. So I really enjoy that feature. Let's see. Screen sharing, definitely want to mention that. So what I'm doing right now is I'm sharing my screen, but I can enable it where anyone can share their screen or just me. So again, depending upon your purpose here, I think it's pretty powerful, especially when you're working with colleagues, for everybody to be able to screen share. It's great for visual, great for demonstrations, things like that. And then there's also some features that you can enable, such as annotation, whiteboards, remote control, nonverbal feedback, all those things that would make for a more engaging meeting, right? You can have tools where you can actually use your mouse to make your mouse bigger, or you can circle key items in red. You can even enable a whiteboard where people can brainstorm or doodle, etc. Lots of good things. And then the nonverbal feedback, you can ask a question, you can kind of give a thumbs up, those types of things. So other engaging opportunities. Okay, so that's the basics of settings. And again, we'll get into advanced in another session, but I wanted to make sure I addressed some of those basic items. Okay, so now we're going to get into attending a meeting. So you can attend a meeting in a couple different ways. And obviously all of you figured out how to attend this meeting. So I'm sure if I were to say, how did everybody join this meeting? I would imagine I probably would get a couple different answers, because there's a couple different ways to do this, right? So probably the quickest way would be clicking directly on the Join Zoom meeting link. Now, where you get that link is up to you, but that is probably the quickest way to access a meeting. Now, you could log into Zoom and actually enter the meeting ID and the password. So for example, my gym is hosting Zoom workouts, and they have a meeting ID on their little website and then the password that goes along with that. And so I just, copy and paste those in and I join that way. But for something that's more integrated into a calendar or email, with respect to work, you might be able to access it a little bit faster that way. So if someone were to email you the email with all the Zoom meeting links and all that, you just simply click on Join Zoom Meeting. Or if someone has sent you the calendar invite, you go into your Google Calendar and you can either click Join Zoom Meeting if you have that integration enabled, or you can click on the little URL that allows you to join the meeting directly from there. Okay, so those are probably the quickest ways to enter a meeting. All right, attendee controls. So this part I decided to just do a screenshot of a couple different resources, because it's kind of ironic. I'm showing you how to navigate Zoom, but I can't screen share my tools because Zoom is the product I'm using to be able to communicate with you right now. So I think this is probably the best visual I can give you. So just a couple of things. So this little toolbar right here is what you see, right? It's typically on the bottom of your screen. You can mute yourself, right? So if you have a little red line going through there, that means you're muted. You can show video, so you can actually have everybody see your face, or you can have that turned off, which you can see everybody has a little something of both. Here you can click on participants if you wanted to enable some of those, muting features, that sort of thing. And I'll get into that later. Chat is where you would access anytime there was maybe a question or any discussion. You'll notice that it'll flash if somebody has written something in there and you haven't seen it yet. So that's the chat feature. Share screen is what I'm doing right now. If I were to click share screen, it would then give me another toolbar up at the top and let me choose what exactly I'm sharing. Recording is what I'm also doing right now. I can record a session And again, when I stop recording, it will automatically save the recording into that same file on my computer that they automatically creates a little Zoom folder, which is where your chat recordings and your actual video recordings will live. And then again, reactions, that's what I was speaking to about, the thumbs up and the smiley face and that sort of thing. And then you can leave here. So let's see, the next piece I wanted to talk about would be participants kind of changing some of their side of things. So if you wanted to change your name, so only time I've ever done this was I was participating in a meeting where we wanted to do separate rooms, and so I renamed. I kept my name, but then I added the district that I was working with, so then that way we could more easily get into specific rooms. But let's say for whatever reason you're in an account and you maybe just want to have your last name, or I'm not sure what purpose it would be, but you would just hover over your name and then click the rename button to change the actual name that's displayed. So maybe you want to, change your name to Mr., Mrs., or Ms., or whatever, instead of having your first name. That would be where you would go. And again, the nonverbal feedback icons that I spoke of, this, you can raise your hand, but you can also lower your hand, that sort of thing. Just little images, thumbs up, thumbs down, etc. And yeah, and obviously you can also share your screen, or you can use the chat box if those features are enabled. So again, all of these things with a couple of considerations would be, what has the host done? So maybe they've turned off some of these features for this particular meeting, or some of this, you'll find some of the settings, and I'm still working through, what's available premium versus basic, but sometimes there are certain features that you're like, I thought I could do that, and you find out it's actually the premium account that can do that. So, all right, so now let's jump to scheduling a meeting. So I'm gonna go into my Zoom here and get out of my settings, and I'm gonna go to meetings. And you'll notice across the top now, I've got a couple different tabs that I can click on. So right now I'm in upcoming meetings, and so you can see my scheduled meetings. I can click on previous meetings to see past meetings that I was the host of, right? And then I'm going to reference the meeting templates too. This is a really cool feature where if you are having a regularly scheduled meeting and you don't want to mess with the settings every time you schedule, if you create a template, then you can just go to meeting templates and then click schedule meeting with this template, and now it's kind of has those settings already pre-saved for you. So I'll show you how to set up a meeting and then select a meeting template. Okay, so if I were to click join or schedule a new meeting, then I can, give it a title. So I will call this my sample training meeting, and I can add a description if I want. And then this is where I can select a template that I have created. So if this is your first time creating a meeting, you can't select a template because you haven't created a meeting before. So just keep that in mind. But if you create a meeting and then you go to create another one, you can select that one as a template. Then you fill out the just the specifics about the meeting, calendar. You can click little calendar to select whatever date and time, the duration. A lot of the stuff will be, not much you have to change besides those things. Maybe it's a recurring meeting. You can set a password again. You can enable some of these features for video, audio, meeting options. So again, we've set our kind of default settings earlier over here, but if you can also change these specifics for this specific meeting and then click save. And then once you save that, again, that template will save those settings. Okay, so I click save. Okay, so now this is one of the things I really enjoy about this Google integration, is that I can add this to my calendar if I just simply click Google Calendar. And if you have not added this yet, there should be an option for you to you know, I think it literally lists these three options, like which one do you want to add it to, and then so you just have to give it permission to access whatever. Again, this is personal preference, but I like being able to have that integration. And then I can see all the settings I've saved, and I can, down at the bottom here, say save as meeting template, right? So if I don't do this, then it's not going to come up in my list of templates. So make sure you do this piece of it before you create a new meeting, and then to use this as a template. And then the really great piece here is this copy invitation. So you'll probably notice a lot of times if you've gotten an email, it will look something like this within the email, right? So I just have to say copy meeting invitation, and then I can throw that in to an email and send it out, right? So that's a nice way to be able to share your meeting. Again, also, if I were to add this to my calendar, I guess I won't add it to my calendar, but I'll go into my calendar right now, and I'll go into the meeting here. I've already added this one in, but now that I've created, this Zoom for Beginners, this is the one that I shared with you. This is our meeting right now. All this information will be down here, right? So I can save this, or I can say, I'm also going to add guests. And so you can see, everybody's been added here. So now, instead of having to just find that email that was sent a couple weeks ago, where is that link? Now, if I have this in my calendar, folks just need to simply go to their calendar and either say join Zoom meeting or click on the join Zoom meeting link here. So it makes it pretty easy for you to attend, but also invite others. Okay, so let me just show you how you would get back to your meeting. So let's say you've created a meeting, you've scheduled a meeting, and now it's the next day and you want to go back and you want to tweak things, or you want to actually, grab the link to share the invitation, for example. So let's say I'm in my profile. I just simply, to get to my meetings, I go to meetings, and then now you'll see my sample training is listed within my new meetings, and I can either click on it here to start it or to access the meeting, or I can go in and I can delete or start depending upon whatever I want to do. Now, if I were to click on this, this is where I could also make edits, right? So I can still make changes to whatever I want about this meeting. Okay. I think I covered everything for scheduling a meeting. And gosh, I could talk endlessly about all of the ins and outs of Zoom, but I'm going to jump to a couple last things and resources, and then I will address some of the chat box things. So, yep. Okay, so just a couple things that when you're hosting a Zoom meeting or even attending, maybe you want to bring in some humor to your Zoom meeting. So I've recently shared these screenshots. I'm sure lots of you have seen like the conference call bingo. It might just be a fun thing if you're having sort of a lighthearted meeting. Might be a fun thing to do. There's all these funny memes and things going around now about remote working. So there's lots of stuff out there. But I also wanted to show you, this is a sample of a quarantine scavenger hunt that a friend shared with me. So this could be something that you could enact with your staff or maybe even some students, and you can, make it your own, edit it, but just, specific to the times that we're working in. I think this one's particularly funny, but anyway. And then the other item is this 23 team building activities. This is actually from Michigan Virtual, and there's kind of some fun resources here that kind of go along with working remotely, right? So these are some things that maybe you could even do at the start of your Zoom session, right? To just kind of bring a little fun and human aspect to your Zoom meeting. And lastly, I have linked lots of different articles and resources for you to reference. I will showcase this Zoom directions for students. So I've got a plethora of resources on lots of different stuff, but just from people around the state. So if you're ever wanting some resources specific to, I mean, anything ed tech, but specifically Zoom, I've got lots of good stuff. But like, for example, if you wanted to use this, this is literally directions for students to navigate Zoom. So this could be a nice help doc or resource for them. And a couple interesting articles just about Zoom exhaustion, and then if you're interested in more specifics about hosting and co-hosting, there's some videos and directions on kind of what hosts or what co-hosts can and can't do here. And in addition to that, the under resources, there's video tutorials and frequently asked questions. Zoom has a really great section on like, how do I do this? Or I need like step-by-step directions and lots of good videos. So don't be afraid to check out some of the actual Zoom specific created resources to help you navigate some of this. All right, and I believe, jumping back into my, yep, that's about it. Okay, so I'm gonna jump into the chat box and address some questions. But I'm gonna go ahead and jump out of here and stop the recording, and then we'll get to the questions.